very much, Chair, and let me start by thanking the Trilateral Cooperation Secretariat, our hosts, for inviting me, and I'm very honoured to be able to share this stage with such distinguished speakers and be part of this important forum. So let me start with the global context. I think that's an important place to start. Economic recovery after global financial crisis has been slow, and quite starkly, trade growth has been even slower. So before the global financial crisis, trade growth was almost double the rate of economic growth globally. Now it's barely keeping up with global GDP growth. That has helped fuel protectionist sentiment globally, seen most spectacularly in the rise of Donald Trump in the United States, and huge uncertainty, and I'll come back to that. But also in Europe, where we have Brexit, and also Europe, which is going to be preoccupied with internal problems for a while. So the leadership we've had from the advanced North Atlantic economies, we cannot rely on anymore. So this is not business as usual. It's really a crisis that is slowly unfolding, and I think it's structural. The problems that led to the rise of Donald Trump in the United States, I think Hillary Clinton would have had to deal with these problems, and they take a long time to reverse. It has to do with all the institutions and structural problems in the United States, such as the education system, healthcare system, tax and transfer system. So what is Asia's response going to be? Before I get to Asia's response, let me talk about the United States situation. So the United States underwrote the global system, was a leader in the global economic system, but now is the major threat to that rules-based international trading system. First of all, the United States withdrew from the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Now that was a blow for the TPP, of course, but more than that, the symbolism of what that represented is a very big worry. Now the TPP, we can try to proceed with a TPP -1, but I think it's a hubs and spokes model where we're missing the hub. It's going to be very difficult for Vietnam, Malaysia, and many others who relied on US market access to make those concessions to come on board. There are other worrying signs. The US Trade Representative Trade Policy Agenda for 2017 had a new approach to WTO dispute settlement. Basically said, we're happy to win, the United States is happy to win, but we'll disregard rulings against the United States. I think if the United States actually follows that through, we're in a lot of trouble. The campaign rhetoric for Donald Trump of putting a 45% tariff on all Chinese imports, or a 35% tariff on all Mexican imports, and to renegotiate or rip up NAFTA, was very worrying. But also, it's not uncommon in US presidential elections to hear such things, but what was more worrying was Trump had a base to do that from, and he named each act and section of the act that the president is able to use to bypass Congress to implement those tariffs. On top of that, as Madam Chen mentioned, there's a border adjustment as part of the destination-based cash flow tax reform. Now, this is not trade policy, but it might have significant impact on trade, in international trade, and the European Union trade lawyers are already lining up to challenge this in the WTO if it comes through, if it passes US Congress. So that would be a worrying sign, especially if we don't think the United States is going to abide by any ruling against it. If the United States does withdraw from the WTO, it's a long shot, but any of these scenarios would involve a big challenge against the United States. If the United States withdraws from the WTO, it automatically reverts to Smoot-Hawley tariffs of the Great Depression, and that should worry us a fair bit. The thinking in the Trump trade policy team, Navarro, Lighthizer, Ross, is fairly consistent, and it says that trade deficits cause job losses. It's a very mercantilist approach that thinks in terms of imports costing jobs. And this is extremely worrying for a global leader such as the United States to be thinking like this. So what is Asia's response going to be? What does it have to be? Asia is still the most dynamic part of the global economy, and actually it will be for some time. So I have very large China growing rapidly that will try to transition out of middle income to high income. I have India, Indonesia with very young, poor populations that are aspiring to middle income and more. And so we can bet that this is going to be the dynamic part of the global economy. There's a strong interest in maintaining an open external environment. A lot of our economies in the region have major reform programs. So Abenomics in Japan, Make in India in India, the supply side reforms in China, and the transition to a more service consumption-led economy in China. They are all very difficult reforms that are made even more difficult with a hostile external environment, with markets externally closing up. So it's important for Asia to take a stand and push back against closing external markets and push back against the threat to the WTO and the trading system. I don't need to remind too many of you here the importance of the WTO system, the rules-based system for trade in Asia, but importantly, beyond the economic linkages, it has very significant security implications in Asia. There's no way that the Japan-China economic relationship, the trading relationship, is the third largest in the world without the WTO. There's no bilateral agreement that is relevant between Japan and China. It is underpinned by confidence in China's accession to the WTO and abiding by those rules. And so those rules and the dispute resolution, are very important. The rare earth metal case, where the dispute between Japan and China, that was resolved in the WTO, and China accepted that ruling. So that is a strong ballast against retaliatory action by Japan or others. But it goes both ways. That is still underpinning the economic relationships in East Asia. So what's the response to the growing uncertainty from North Atlantic, the United States and Europe, and the risks? And what do the responses have to be to some of these trade war provocations? Well, for Asia to maintain our economics dominating our politics, and not the other way around for our relationships in Asia, I think there's a strong interest that we share in China, Japan, Korea, but beyond, in a collective response, and it has to be collective. So I think, as many speakers have mentioned today, the two obvious ones really, and actually the two only ones, are RCEP and the CJK trilateral. RCEP provides a natural platform for Asian countries to project a pushback, to project its interests against the United States and Europe, and actually is now the only game in town internationally in the mega-regional space, the broad liberalization beyond narrow bilaterals. So with TPP and TTIP no longer relevant, RCEP has to be ambitious, has to set the pathway forward for the free trade area of the Asia-Pacific and hopefully beyond. Hopefully it can set the standards over time for the WTO. Now, that may sound very ambitious, but I think we need leader-led ambition in this region, not just leadership from our trade ministers and our trade negotiators, but this has to be leadership-level ambition and collective leadership. Importantly, what goes underemphasized in RCEP quite often is the cooperation agenda. I think that's very important. It's the ASEAN way, as we heard earlier this morning, of really constant meetings, dialogue, just as we're having today and just as CJK continues to have, where that experience sharing and capacity building in Asia is going to actually make a big difference beyond the initial cuts and initial commitments made in an RCEP deal. Also, just quickly, I think it's really important to recognize the opportunity in RCEP that provides cover for making progress where it's otherwise difficult. So I saw the TPP very largely as a Japan-US agreement with the rest of us, including Australia, as cover, political cover, to make it easier to do a big bilateral deal. Well, RCEP provides cover for Japan-China, Korea-Japan, India-China, these agreements to make progress. They're going to be too difficult to negotiate bilaterally, so there's an opportunity. And finally, the CJK trilateral, I think this is a very, very important arrangement and process, emphasize process. The cooperation here is sustained despite the ups and downs in the political relationships. And when tensions rise, the dialogue in the CJK continues at the official level, ministerial level, and the Track 2 level. And I think that's extremely important. Progress in CJK will help RCEP, and ambitious commitments in CJK will help make much more ambitious commitments in an RCEP agreement. And really, we have 3 large economies and 3 large international traders. If there's progress here in CJK, that doesn't just have implications for Northeast Asia, as Ambassador Ogura said this morning, but has global implications. So I want to stop there and thank you very much.